Thank you very much, dear Marion and Güneş, for the kind introduction and the invitation to participate in your series of online talks. It's really a great pleasure and privilege to present in your series our results. It's also a great honor, dear Trevor, to say thank you in this way for everything you've done for us. I will give this talk also, as Marion already said, on behalf of Christoph Purschwitz and Hans-Georg Gebel, with whom I co-direct the Household and Death project in Baja. I'm very thankful to them, since without their cooperation and of course the cooperation of the whole Baja team, it would have been impossible to present these studies here. The two previous lectures by Trevor Watkins and Juan Ibanez have plainly shown the most decisive processes during the later pre-pottery Neolithic. I will just shortly recall them before talking to you about the amazing side of Baja, where many of these processes can be confirmed from a micro perspective. There were increasing permanence of settlements, increasing population sizes and densities, and a high dominance of domesticates. However, with hunting playing still a certain role. In addition, we see an environmental deterioration after a climatic optimum during the 7th millennium BC. Moreover, we observe increasing entanglement with things and domesticates, increasing segregation and specialization, and increasing risk of unknown new illnesses due to the close relation of domestic animals. Increasing ecological anthropogenic transformations. Taken together, this suggests that the potential for conflict increased. So thus, one of the major questions of our project is how did the people of Baja manage their daily life facing these challenges? How can I proceed? Okay. In the next 15 minutes, we will surmise that one of the aspects that kept these communities together were their strong collective memories based on a very close relation to their dead. We will first give a short introduction to the site and to our new project. Then we focus on the new areas discovered during, can you hear me? No? There's something wrong, okay. Discovered during the last 4 years, and finally, we come to the creation of collective memories. But now let's go to Baja. The site is located on an intermontane plateau about 14 kilometers north of the famous site of Petra, at about 1,200 meters above sea level. It is surrounded by 70-meter deep gorges, and the access to the site is very difficult. All material must be brought up by hand, and of course, all finds must be brought down. Without cooperation, excavating at Baja is hardly possible. Every helping hand counts. There is one person to whom we owe not only the discovery of the site in the early 1980s, but he has tirelessly continued research at Baja since 1997 until today. I'm sure most of you will recognize him on the photo. The beard has just changed the color a bit. We are most grateful to Hans-Georg Gebel that we can be part of the Baja team. As Marion said, Christoph is part of the team since many years, but I myself was some kind of refugee when our project at Kurtik Tepe near Diyarbakir had finished. After the first exploration phase, with a strong focus on the environment and intensive surveying, the second phase of Baja research started after the completion of the nearby late PPNB site of Basta in 1997, with the first large excavations and ended in 2012. After that, it's once populated, with the main occupation phase during the late. Remains of architecture had been found in every trench, with walls preserved up to 4 meters high. The excavations were so successful that it was even possible to give a rather precise reconstruction of the settlement here by Moritz-Kinzel. There's no doubt that Baja, despite its small size, was part of the so-called megasite phenomenon, a process of accelerated settlement growth and density in the Levant, including many famous sites such as Basta, Baja, Ain Shammam, Al-Basit in the Petra area, Boya, Esefaya, Jericho, and not to forget, of course, Moza and Ain Ghazal and many others. In 2016, when we started the new Household and Death project, our aim was not to open large new squares, but to gain deep knowledge about how life and death was organized at Baja. Literally, we went deeper in already excavations had stopped before. It was that our approach was designed as holistic and transdisciplinary research. This means that segregation should be considered all contributing to the special way of Neolithic life at Baja. Meanwhile, our team includes more than 25 specialists, far more than planned in 2017. It is impossible to mention all the complex questions here. Therefore, I would like to refer you to the 2 published articles in Neolithics, especially the one from 2017 includes our research design. Our talk here focuses on the 3rd complex of questions concerning the relation of the living community to their late members, which spatial, social, ritual, and cognitive relations existed between the living and the dead, which role played the burial rituals for the dead for the identity of the households and the community. Death was at Baja, I think, a constant threat, not only due to new illnesses which developed because of the now closer living together of domestic animals, as already suggested by former research at Baja and now confirmed thanks to the systematic recording of earthquake damages at the site, it became clear that the tectonic situation was everything but optimal for settlement. As you can see here, Baja is surrounded by folds running in opposed directions. These one move in this direction, the other in the other direction, and here again a vertical fold. This means that earthquakes were a constant threat at Baja. At least one tremendous quake, you see here coming down walls, let many walls come down. Air chambers in the fillings point to the tremendous earthquake. But the people of Baja did not give up. As you can see here, they reconstructed new houses on top of the older walls. As the room biographical approach developed by Hans-Georg Gebel and Christoph Purschwitz, the architecture of Baja must be understood as a constant building, recycling, rebuilding process. The yellow phase recorded here in area C dates to the settlement occupation after this major earthquake. To sum up, death was a major threat at Baja. The rugged environment with its deep gorges contributed to the risk of lethal animals, illnesses, and possibly also conflicts that came up with the densely populated settlement. An interim report of the results of the earthquake research and on our last campaign will be published soon as a special issue of Neolithics. But instead of excluding death, the people of Baja domesticated it in a literal sense of the word and lived in close relationship to their dead. This leads me to the second part of our talk, the burial rituals at Baja. Before our project had started, one so-called trash burial, you can see it here, was found in the western part, most western part of the settlement. And 3 further collective burials had been discovered. One in area D, which hid the famous wall painting, and 2 in area C. In 2016, we returned to the site and found beneath very elaborate primary single burial, this one here, of a young man, and a double burial of 2 infants. With the knowledge of the elaborate burial, it became clear that there was at least one other burial that was covered with the reused gravel of the floor and plastered white. However, we only could come back in 2018 to open it, and additionally discovered a small part of a collective burial, another single burial here, and the collective burial here. At latest then, it became clear that we need an anthropologist on the site. Luckily, Julia Greski joined us in 2019, and that was a big chance. She knew the site from the collective burials she had excavated together with Michael Scholz in 2000 and 2005. Without her, supported by Sarah Dermech here, it would have been impossible to excavate the large collective burial here. In fact, it turned out that almost the whole eastern and southern part of the room was the large burial area. Additionally, in the neighboring rooms, one subadult burial after the other popped up. You can imagine how stressful this campaign was, but in a moment, I hope you will see it was worth it. But going back to 2016, to understand the several steps of the rather standardized burial ritual at Baja, let's have a closer look at the burial of the young adult man. As most of the burials, it was located near a wall, this wall here, and even undercut it. It was close to a window-like opening, which probably gave access to this room. The grave was sealed by reused plaster. That was the reason why they didn't recognize it as a burial before. There were even some white plaster remains preserved here in the corner. When we dug further, we uncovered the second layer of the grave ceiling. And in this grave ceiling, we found a flint dagger, the only 3rd example from Baja, a bone spatula, a stone vessel fragment, and a pestle, and additionally 2 intentionally sniped arrowheads. Beneath this layer, 3 huge, you can see them here, stone slabs appeared, and below these, finally, we found the skeleton. Unfortunately, the preservation of the bones were very poor. We are lucky that the mandible, parts of the skull, and the basin were partly preserved, so that Katie White, the anthropologist who was with us during that campaign, identified it as a probably male young adult. ADNA and direct dating of the bones failed, but small pieces of charcoal from the burial filling of the adult, you can see it here, and from the 2 infant burials date to around 7000 BCE. This means it is confirmed that's the late PPNB occupation. The skeleton was resting on its right side, on its left side, sorry, in a hawker position, and the right hand was gripping the upper left arm, on which he wore a ring, very rare ring, of 4 marl rings and 1 mother of pearl ring. On the right arm, he also wore a mother of pearl ring. A few turquoise and amazonite beads and a carnelian bead were found on the chest around the neck. Next to his right shoulder was a so-called mace head. You can see it here. Oops, here it is. which had been intentionally destroyed in situ with a pointed stroke. First strontium isotope analysis of one of the infants and from the adult are in the range of the local signal. Here, these are the two samples we could take. These are reference samples from animals, and these are the Baja individuals. However, we are still waiting for the results of other individuals to see whether they were local too. With the knowledge of this burial, we could hardly wait to go back to the site in 2018. If you see the next burial, you probably know why. And I apologize for this green thing here. I don't know what it is. It just appeared now. It had an identical cover with the same surrounding stone slabs here. However, we first had to find a grant. And fortunately, the project was then financed in 2018 and we could start to excavate it. Unlike the burial of the adult, this burial was additionally covered with white glittering sandstone slabs, which were, as we realized, intentionally destroyed only shortly before the burial, since they fitted perfectly well together. Embedded in this cover were 5 grinding stones. You can see 2 of them here, and here's a 3rd one. And beneath them was again a huge red sandstone slab. You can imagine the tension. Hala Alavashi, most of you know her, specialist for prehistoric beads in the Near East, was with us studying ornaments in the base camp. It was her first day on the excavation. In the heat of July, we carefully brushed layer of sand away, but there was nothing. This was quite disappointing. We feared it might be a cenotaph. But then one bead appeared and happily recorded it as number 1, but then another and another. We had to stop but photograph drew sketches of taking off the bead in groups to construction and conservation. Behind the neck, a black buckle appeared. Here you can still see a small disc bead attached to it. On the chest was a mother of pearl ring, poorly preserved, but very similar to the one that had been found in 2000 in the collective burial in Area D. In the end, almost 2,600 beads were excavated. Currently, the anthropological analyses are still ongoing. Unfortunately, no aDNA was preserved, so that we can only suggest a female sex and an age between 8 to 10 years, according to the mandible, being well aware that the identification of sex of subadults is very uncertain, of course. Because of the aesthetic use of color and bead types, we call this child the beautiful. Used were an miller's necklace show that they were used for a long time, and some of the beads were even underlining their high value. This one, recycled bead. Within the framework of the CARE project, a cooperation project between the Yamuk University and Ex-Oriente e.V., the necklace and the burial of Jamila are reconstructed and will hopefully be on display in a Jordanian museum whenever it will be possible again. Thanks to a 1-year loan and an additional grant by the German Research Foundation and the Franz and Eva Rutzen Stiftung, and of course by the support of Ex-Oriente, it was possible to conserve and reconstruct the necklace at the Academy of Arts in Stuttgart, where it is still waiting in the safe to be retransferred to Jordan. The reconstruction of the Gravesist is directed by Hussein Al-Sabaha from the Yamuk University in cooperation with Martin Barder from the National Swiss Museum. You see both here just lifting the largest burial slab. The reconstruction of the Gravesist, every constructional element has been recorded in its position, carefully wrapped and brought down the thick. The plan for the reconstruction made by Martin Barder is ready and is waiting to be realized. Due to COVID-19, it has not been possible to travel. Although Jamila's burial topped all our expectations, I will shortly also mention the other lavishly decorated burial discovered in 2019. 2 children of the age of 3 to 4 years and isolated bones of at least 2 infants were buried together in this multiple burial. I cannot go into details here, but just note the different use of colors and bead types in this tomb, compared to the jewelry of Jamila. Whereas in Jamila's grave, red and white dominated, here white and yellow are dominant. On the chest of one of the children was a small mother of pearl pendant. Both share some of the bead types, those highlighted in red here. But whereas in Jamila's grave, turquoise was used in the multiple burial, exclusively chrysocolla, a rather soft mineral with a high amount of copper, was used. The body decoration of one child was dominated by white shells, above all cauries and nerites, which are completely absent in Jamila's necklace, but common at Baja, for example. Both other children had colorful hipped belt in this area here, or cloth decorations with many various colorful stone and shell beads and mother of pearl pendants. A very similar, though larger pendant was found in the collective burial we uncovered in 2019. The people of Baja had a clear template in mind when they created the small pendant. Like the larger one, they started drilling holes in the left, right, and lower branch, but they did not continue, realizing that if they would pierce them completely, the whole object would probably break. And here you see that these holes are pierced completely. 2 other aspects seem worth to be remembered: that the small stone vessel of the children's grave was broken too, and the 2 pieces were found separated above the grave cover, and that in the collective burial, again, a large and a smaller mother of pearl ring were found close to an infant skeleton. These larger mother of pearl rings have a rather standardized size, and all of them have 2 holes. Up until now, they have always been found in relation to subadults. Additionally, some of them have appendices like in the grave of Jamila, or from an infant in the collective burial in Area D. Similar mother of pearl rings were found in an infant burial at Basta many years ago, and in a multiple burial at the same site. By decorating dead children with these ornaments, they may have been ascribed a certain social identity, possibly according to their age, but it cannot be excluded that these artifacts also indicate other affiliations. In total, between 2016 and 2019, at least 26 subadult burials were uncovered, keeping in mind that the investigations of the collective burial are still ongoing. As you can see, most of the subadults of all ages were buried in collective burials, the red signs here. Children up to 10 years were buried in single burials. Strikingly, children of the age of 4 to 3, these one here, were only buried in double or in the multiple burial, where they were associated to younger infants. Although this is a puzzling observation, it is much too early to make a rule out of it. We only start to realize now how complex the burial processes may have been. Overlapping of graves do not exist, although in one case a more recent burial is clearly related to an earlier infant burial. It seems clear that, as Annabel Vercoen highlighted in the last discussion, that there was a mental map about burials. Some of them were firmly sealed and segregated from the living area by small walls, but still they were in the basements of the houses. Handling human bones was a common practice for the collective burials. Moreover, in 2 cases, reopenings of the graves might be possible, although it cannot be excluded that isolated bones were kept apart for some while and put in the grave as some kind of grave goods. As we have just seen, there are recurrent aspects in the burial rituals. Nonetheless, there's much variation going on too. Some burials have large covering slabs, intentionally destroyed glittering white sandstone slabs on top, covered with white plaster, gravel, imitating floors. Others have one large slab and a few do not have any grave construction at all. The same variability concerns grave goods and ornaments. Some do not have any grave goods, others have exotic objects like the dagger, or here, for example, the small purple flint arrowhead, which is non-local but from the area of Oman. And at the other end of the scale are the burials such as the one of Jamila or the multiple burial, with about 2,600 or 1,150 beads respectively. This high number of beads, especially of disc beads in some burials, confirm observations made for Ashikli, Çatalhöyük, or Halula. As Emma Basil suggested, stone disc beads are one of the major unifying elements of the Neolithic ornamentation practices. There is an increasing number of ornaments in burials during the 8th millennium BC. Compared to other late PPNB burials in the Levant, the number of beads at Baja remains extraordinary. It appears that most communities of the early agricultural villages used other diacritical means in burial rituals, among which the most prominent was probably the so-called skull cult, for which we do not have any clear evidence at Baja so far. Just to complete this section, it is evident that the sites in the Upper Tigris region, such as Bonçuklu Tala or Kurtiktepe, but also Çatalhöyük, are still unreached by any of the late PPNB sites in the Levant. To find out whether the elaborate burials or certain grave goods were restricted to one group or to one household, we mapped the spatial distribution of the various grave goods, categories, and ritual elements. It turns out that there is no exclusiveness. On the contrary, for example, the exotic daggers were found in area C and D. The 2 mace heads also come from area C and D. The same holds true for the mother of pearl ornaments. A piece which might belong to a similar cross-like pendant was uncovered even in area B many years ago. The bead types were also found all over the site. Of course, as you have seen, in different amounts and combinations, but access to exotic raw materials was not restricted. Stone vessel fragments or intentionally destroyed vessels were embedded in many grave covers. The strong bias you can see that most of the objects were found in area C reflects only that of excavation, but not the prehistoric situation. If we now widen our focus, we see that there's also a strong network relating contemporary sites of the greater Petra area. Christoph Purschwitz has worked on flint raw materials and identified a large exchange network. The most obvious relations existed between Baja and Basta. Identical bead types and very similar ornaments were used there. But again, this probably reflects more the state of research than prehistoric networks. With further excavation and research, probably closer similarities to other sites would occur, such as Ain Jamam or Al-Basid. Closer relations must have existed also to the Badia and the Negev and southeastern Jordan. Minerals rich in copper, such as malachite and chrysocolla, you can see here one of the beads, most probably came from Wadi Fenan or Timna near the Red Sea. So-called purple flint is supposed to come from the area of Amman. Carnelian may have come from the Negev, Sinai, or western Saudi Arabia. At Baja, unworked pieces of carnelian were rather common, but beads were very rare. Amazonite sources are in southeastern Jordan. Raw materials for the various shell beads came from the Red Sea. Cowries from the Red Sea were found even at Halula, 800 kilometers further north. If we would add all the non-local flint resources comprehensively studied by Christoph, this network would even become denser. The central question thus is, what was behind these networks, locally and regionally? Much has been written about a clear tradition relating the past with the present via the memory on some selected individuals whose skulls were exposed and reburied later. They hint at an intensified public display of social affiliations long after death. At Aswad, Danielle Stoder and her team uncovered a group of plastered skulls where an infant was buried on top here, relating generations, at least in burial ritual. Similar observations were made at Ain Ghazal by Gary Wolfson, at Baisemun, Halula, and at several other sites in the Near East. They are listed in this article here. From our epigenetic traits on teeth at Basta, we have suggested that for me, very close with most of the individual isotopics. So probably familial relations played an important for the commitment to one and social group. And remember the telling title by Gary Rolifson, his talk at the I Am We, highlighting the increased importance of active identity modalities, which do not need to be based on familial relations, but on strong corporate identities. Whether these groups were further segregated in elite and non-elite is a matter of debate. If we follow the definition by Mem for just living clearly different from our evidence at Baja, does not point to the existence of an elite despite the in burials. To temporal leaders primi inter pares, perhaps in flat-top chieftains, as Hans-Georg Gebel has already suggested many years ago. At Baja, we neither have exclusive access to exotic raw materials, we do not see any segregation of elite buildings or burials, but rather an integration. There's no segregation of cult and domestic, and no evidence for differences in lifestyles. And there's no visible possession or accumulation of prestigious objects, but rather circulation and excommodification. We have seen that many valuable goods were intentionally destroyed. So we surmise that within the Neolithic habitus communities of the late PPNB in the southern Levant, at Baja, individuals or groups may have achieved power temporarily in their special fields of competence. Leading positions, however, in the various fields of power had to be negotiated constantly, and they interacted. but there is no evidence that they were transformed into institutionalized hierarchies. What was it then that kept people together, despite the increased potential of conflict within the large PPNB megasites? This leads me to the third part of our talk. We surmised that one of the means to enhance commitment were strong collective memories created and supported by the close relations of dead and living people. At this point, we must make a short excursion into neurobiology. You all know these situations. You smell a certain perfume or listen to a certain song or visit a certain place, and suddenly pictures of the past emerge in your mind. These moments of sometimes even involuntary memories influence your behavior and decisions. You may want it or not, but your brain constantly compares past and present, and by judging within milliseconds, often influenced more by emotions than by reason, takes decisions. Yet, it is an illusion that your decisions have been taken by yourself alone. Hundreds of other people, some more, some less, influence your memories. They are not only part of these memories, but they influence the way how and which situations you recall. To make matters worse, this manipulation of your mind by others does not only concern the activation processes of your memory, but even your perception and the selection of what is stored in your memory at all. Social neurosciences have shown in various tests that the activation areas when thinking of yourself and of others overlap more or less strongly. Newborns from themselves only in dyadic processes by mirroring and imitating others, but also adults are influenced by others when memorizing. To simplify the argument for our concerns, individual and collective memories can be separated analytically, yet if we believe in social neurosciences, there is no such thing as an independent individual memory, nor does collective memory exist without individuals who embody and enact these memories. Our reconstruction of the past is thus constantly shaped by these processes of recalling. It is neither static nor objective, but biased by your and your community's perspectives. The same holds true, of course, for things. Not only people influence our memory, but above all, objects with long use biographies can influence our minds considerably. To put it in an abstract level, the past inevitably plays an important role for the present and future, and it highly influenced by the environments to which we are socialized. These findings, in fact, are bitter pills for all prehistorians, but it offers us also a new field of research. How were memories created in the past? Can we find out what people of the past considered worth to be remembered? How did they conceive the relation of past, present, and future? Even though the latter topic would be of much interest, this would be another talk. But in the recent volume on consciousness and creativity by Ian Hodder, you will find important aspects on this topic. So in the last part of our talk, I will try to find out what may have been important for the collective memory of the people from Baja and how this relationship to the past influenced their lives. If we recall shortly the burial rituals we have described in part 2 of the talk, we may suggest that they intended to create moments to be remembered, even though we will never know precisely what every individual felt. Our focus is on the enactment and mediality and how collective moments of memory were created. As we will show in our conclusion, some of the acts may have caused a wide range of very ambiguous feelings. Close relatives, definitely, felt different on the loss of a child than someone less familiar. The burial construction demanded collective labor and thus may have caused feelings of strength, power, and pride and belonging, contributing to something one person alone could never have achieved. The noise of the destruction of objects stimulated the auditive sense. The contrast of the shining white sandstones with the red and yellow pigments are striking. Research on the impact of colors has shown that the perception of colors is of course primed culturally, but strong contrasts, such as in patterns and glittering objects, are generally attractive. You have seen that in the burials, ornaments of mother of pearl and the sandstone slabs are very glittering objects. The sophisticated objects like the daggers or the jewelry may have caused admiration and contemplation, but perhaps also feelings of jealousy and deprivation if some members of the group could not afford such things. The use of fire during burial rituals, which is attested by layers of ashes, charcoals, and burnt patches of floors near the burials, may have caused negative or positive feelings. Memory during burial rituals was thus stimulated by the stimulation of all senses, synchronized movements and emotions. As we've seen, burial rituals followed a repetitive pattern. Moreover, the deliberate destruction of certain things with long used biographies or high symbolic meaning was probably an emotionally arousing moment, enhancing the emotional relation of the giving person with the dead through, as John Chapman would call it, enchainment. Memorizing was also enhanced by repetitive standardized processes, reactivating in a somehow autocatalytic process memories of former experiences. To come to our conclusion, living in permanent villages and farming demanded loyalty and reliable planning. The intermodal burials served these needs. More than ever, people related past, present, and future on a personal scale. We do not say that they remembered every individual personally, but memory was forged relating past and present through humans. The burial places were thus more than just a domestication of death. They maintained the collective memory and social cohesion, giving memory a place, stimulating all senses during the burial ritual and through repetitive interaction. They also represented the past in daily life and thus created strong guidelines for behavior and decisions within the habitus communities, possibly based on familial relations. They also enforced the social order within the living community through the commitment to the dead and the display of the objectified social relationships and prosperity during burial rituals. By burying the valued goods, which were often loaded with memories or even agency due to their long used biographies, they enhanced the emotional relations to the dead. These strong traditions enhanced the emotional commitment, promoted successful cooperation and specialized productions, feeling of belonging and protections, and last but not least, loyalty, irrespective of remuneration. But these advantages came at a high cost. Escaping control and individualism became difficult. Innovation beyond local traditions needed much efforts to be accepted. Due to the personified emotional relation and an identification with the past, circumscription and probably segregation of groups was potentially facilitated with all its drawbacks. Death may have been instrumentalized to enhance power and social differences. Rituals are always ambivalent and may manifest segregation instead of leveling social differences. Lastly, the burials of some individuals became a challenging task not everybody could afford. Thank you for your attention. And I also thank all the Baja team members. I thank you also, Dominic Bonatz, for hosting the project in the department. And special thanks are also due to the Department of Antiquities and to all members of former excavations at Baja. Thanks to their work and efforts, our Deep Knowledge project became possible. Finally, we are grateful to all and cooperation partners, and of course to all the workmen from Baja and Bir Dabagat, not only for their excellent work, but above all for their incredible hospitality. And I think this is the moment where we should all thank Hans-Georg Gebel, who over so many years promoted research at Baja. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion. Can you please turn off the screen? Yep. Unshare the screen.
Done.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so very much, Marion. This was fascinating and very stimulating. Really, it was a very stimulating talk. You know, we all study and work on burials, argue and discuss the relation between the dead and the living communities. But I mean, you know, during your talk, for example, I thought of Central Anatolia and the communities there and how they create those memories, etc. And it's so different than yours, which is so good. That's actually our aim. That's how we started to design this series, this lecture series. So I'm really very happy hearing all and seeing those differences and hearing about Baja. So maybe there are some questions, but before that, let me remind you. This time let's try to raise hands, or to use that raise hand icon. Probably it will be more systematic. Otherwise, we sometimes miss the questions. Some write on the chat and some ask, so we may miss. Why don't we just try this to use the raise hand icon this time? So here is one. Anna likes to ask something.
No,
please, Anna.
Sorry, I was just actually clapping my hands when Marion said that we have to pay tribute to Hans-Georg for his work. Sorry about that. It was more like clapping the hand than a question. I will have a question, but I have to digest first.
Okay. Trevor likes to ask something. Trevor, can you please unmute? We cannot hear you.
Okay, now you hear me.
No, okay.
Yeah. That was wonderful, Marion. What I thought you did so well was to make it clear the cost of living in a community like that for the individuals, the way people had to rely completely on each other. Yeah, there was no central authority that they could turn to. There was they simply had to live together, and it must. And the bigger the community, and the more difficult the place, in the case of Baja, the more costly that was. Yeah, and how you showed the burials as illustrating how people paid the costs of living together for centuries. It's not just for a few years. Even at a relatively short-lived site like Baja, it's still maybe 6-7 centuries of living together. It's an extraordinary achievement, yeah, compared to anything that we know in our world today. Yep.
Right. Absolutely correct, Trevor. Thank you.
But can I follow up on that? I was struck. I didn't know there were so many burials of sub-adults and children and babies. Yeah, of course there would be a very high death rate of young people. Yeah,
yeah.
But there's nowhere near enough burials to account for the population. They are still being accorded special burials. Yeah, why do you think these young people are special and get such elaborate burials?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question, Trevor. You know that we see only this big differentiation in the burials. There are some babies which do not receive any grave goods, no grave construction. And at the other end of the scale, you have Jamila, an 8 to 10-year-old child, which had this beautiful necklace, a very complicated construction of the grave. But the idea behind why this child was buried in such an elaborate burial, yeah, there can be many reasons, even a sudden death or an unusual death, and yeah, there are so many reasons for this. Unfortunately, the bones are preserved so badly that we cannot even find whether there were pathologies, because the surface of the bones are gone.
Yeah, I was expecting, Marion, that knowing what you were going to talk about, that you would be concluding that in this late phase of PPMB, we're seeing the emergence of ascribed status, people who are who have high status, not by achievement, but by birth. Yeah, but you didn't.
No, I didn't.
No.
No, intentionally. No, I didn't. Because I think we have to be careful. It's very tricky if we only have a look at the burials. We have the same problem, for example, at Kurtik-Tepe. The houses, they are not different at all. And in the isotopes, we don't see any differences. So everybody ate the same stuff more or less. Unfortunately for Baja, we don't have CNN isotope analysis because there's no preservation of the collagen. We tried this, but there's nothing to do. And concerning the architecture, we definitely see big differences. It's not like in Halula, for example, where you see that some households can afford more things. It's very homogeneously distributed. But perhaps Christoph can say something about the technology at this point, which seems not distributed that homogeneously.
Thank you, Marion, for your great talk. Also from my side, I think you are meaning the technology of Flint,
yes,
right?
Right.
Okay, this is quite interesting because, as you said, if you're looking on the architecture, I mean, we have more or same size houses, and so far we cannot see a big difference among the houses. And I made in this project research on the Flint technology and the distribution among the households and household dumps. And I was primarily looking on where household learning may have occurred. So, and we had in the last years a relatively huge debate on specialization in the late PPNB or on some PPNB. It has been argued that for the bidirectional plate core technology, it might not have been everybody involved, but certain specialists. And if you look on Basta, I mean, this is definitely confirmed by the huge dumps of bidirectional core technology, which seems to be associated to workshops which Hans-Georg has excavated there. But if you look on Baja, it looks a bit different. Recently, we did found some workshop dams of bidirectional core technology, but they are much, much smaller in intensity. So if we're talking, for example, to give some numbers on hundreds and thousands of cores which had been reduced at Basta, we may have only 10 to 50 less than 100 cores in these dumps at Baja. But so this looks a bit that not everybody in Baja was participating in this flint technology. Although, on the other hand, the knowledge seems to be free. It was not confined in the term because this can be seen on the exhausted cores and on napping debris, which we in small numbers have in the household, but not in concentrations. And often these elements of the core tech or core reduction in the households, they are associated with quite a high number of napping errors. So it looks to me that they are much lesser skilled than the people who are responsible for the larger dumps.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. Any questions?
I think Karina made a good point. She wrote that the extra memorialization of those lost too soon.
Yes,
concerning
yeah.
the infant burials.
Yeah, we have the chat.
I'm sorry, my hand is already raised. Can I ask now?
Sure, sure, please.
Well, maybe I'm calling wrongly, Marion. I'm really overwhelmed. It was a fantastic talk. What I would like to know is, do you have any grave goods in burials of grown-ups, of adults?
Just the one, the young adult man. All the other adults were buried in the collective burials. We have the trash burial, which I mentioned before, which was excavated in 2005. It has no grave goods. Some flints came in the grave filling, but probably not intentionally. But on the other hand, there's, Hans called him Oseid, the young adult man. He has very specific grave goods. First, there's the dagger. We only have 3 exemplars of these daggers. And then above all, there is this composite upper arm ring of 3 marl rings and 1 mother of pearl ring. And what was very interesting is this destroyed mace head next to his right shoulder. It was destroyed in the grave. So we see the impact. We have some chips laying around. And this is very interesting. And I could not go into detail of this separation of grave goods. We have in the grave cover, we have the dagger, the mace, the pestle, the stone vessel fragment. And as some kind of personal objects, we have some beads and the arm rings and the mace head. This seems very interesting to me.
And when you are saying young adult, what is the range for the definition? Because it shifts, you know, different physical anthropologists use different range of age.
Yeah,
can you be a little bit more precise? Whether you know?
20 to 35, something about that.
20 to 25.
30.
Okay, 35. Wow. Yeah, it's a huge range. Yeah.
Yeah, but
no, I understand. Yeah, because of the preservation. Sure.
It's so a pity. You know, we have a lot of roots in the graves, and yeah, that's very.
Yeah. And what's the proportion, let's say, of grown-ups versus children in general? I mean,
in general, we have a high proportion of infants, of course. This came now with the new burials, with the children burials. Rather low proportion of grown-up children's, and yeah, a lot of you have to calculate also the other collective burials we found before.
Yeah.
These have been published only preliminary, but we were now able to analyze one of them in area C, the one, and it seems that this is the normal distribution of ages. So we have 3 young adults between the age of late juvenile, between 15 and 20, and 2 young adults too.
So which means that actually all the other age ranges were buried elsewhere, or you didn't find them yet? Because if you have so many youngsters or young adolescent, and so I suppose the older folk was also dying. But
we must be always aware that we only have a part of the community. These can't be all burials. There must be more. And these are very special burials because they are in the basements of the houses. And so we suppose that there must have been different forms of interments, or even not interred, but thrown to
somehow related to the house, to the foundations, you would say?
Yeah, no, not to foundations, no. The foundations of the houses are built first, and then the burials are cut through the floors. They reuse the material after for covering the burials again. That's why we didn't find in the beginning, because they're really covered like floors. And in the neighboring rooms, you see floors are renovated and life continued in these rooms.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sorry I took up so much time.
Thank you. Daniela likes to ask.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much. Very interesting, Marion. I really enjoyed this talk. I have a few comments and questions about the beads.
Right.
Of course. Regarding to the source of copper, I'm now involved in the research of the Timna Valley, and we're not aware of any activities prior to the Chalcolithic.
Right,
so
excellent.
Not very likely that this would have been the source during the Neolithic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing is that I was wondering whether you have any evidence for on-site production of the beads, any waste material, any drills, etc. And my last comment is just that you mentioned the use of yellow beads.
Yellow beads?
Yes?
No, yellow pigments.
Oh, yellow pigments, but not beads.
No.
Oh, okay, okay, because yellow is very, very rare in Neolithic sites altogether.
We just have the dominance of beads are in fact shell beads and the red limestone beads.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense and very common in all other Neolithic sites practically.
Yeah. And what is very interesting, what I mentioned, is that there's a differentiation between the chrysocolla and the turquoise. We have burials with only turquoise bracelets, but no use of chrysocolla. And we have the multiple burial where there's no turquoise, but only chrysocolla. So this is
very interesting. Very interesting, because at Nahal Chemal Cave, for example, there is a dominance of turquoise beads, no chrysocolla whatsoever.
Okay.
The only other green beads are amazonite and maybe a few other little things, but in terms of anything significant, it would be only the turquoise and amazonite, and no chrysocolla, even though chrysocolla and apatite would have been the nearer sources of the green beads. So and that's in general in the relatively near geographic zone to where you are.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. And coming back to your question about the production waste, I would like to refer this question to Hala. Is she here, Hala? Is she
Hala?
Here? Yeah, she needs to unmute, Hala.
Hala, can you say something about production waste and the production of beads? As far as I know, we don't have a really found a workshop like at Baja. This would be wonderful, but Hala can tell you more about the production.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Daniela, for the question. So, as Marion said, there is no concrete workshops in Baja was found, I mean, in terms of excavations. We have to check with Christoph if he examined some lithic tools that might have been worked shells or soft stones, or even in terms of traces. I can't remember the name of the specialist in traceology. You know,
Useware, yeah.
Yeah, useware. Anyway, as for the beads, yes, I think there are many indications that let us say that there were processing of beads on the site, especially regarding the mother of pearl shells, because there are a lot of pieces that can correspond to different steps or stages of the chain opératoire, from the whole shell. It's completely entire, but we can trace actually if you only look to the variability of sizes and technical traces on these pieces from mother of pearl shells, you can see that they did process rings and other small objects from mother of pearl shells on the site. I also think that they did some stone beads on the site as well, because we have unfinished beads. Some of them are in the stage of shaping, so they were not yet perforated, and others, they have started perforating them and then they stopped for some reasons. Bone beads are very rare on the site, and I didn't see any signs of working in process regarding bones. What else? I think that these are the main categories that they are, as in many of the Neolithic sites. So, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Daniela. Ian Kite likes to ask. Yeah.
Yes, hello to everybody.
Yeah, go ahead. Hi.
Good. Hi there. I just wanted to say, just looking at all these people and looking at Hala and other folks, I'm deeply envious of those of you that are sort of now to a point where you're about to have a beer or something similar, as opposed to those of us that are in the middle of the day having coffee. So it's interesting to see sort of time warps and what that means. So I want to say a couple different things. First of all, really neat presentation. It is everything you're putting forth from my standpoint is in some ways helping us advance our conversations towards social relationships and trying to understand these aspects of remembering and forgetting and how this can be materialized, how we theorize this in some capacity. And that's super, super important, because as we try and pull apart this whole aspect of what do these beads mean? What does it mean to have so many beads? It encourages us to think in more complex ways about those questions, to sort of put aside these static categories of ascribed status or something else. And that's not meant in a dismissive way towards what you said, Trevor, because I go down that path as well. All of that is really interesting. One of the things that I find your work is really helpful with is that it just, again, draws this attention towards this interface between adults and sub-adults, children, wherever we're going to identify them. And that's a slippage point that we see in so many different places in the Neolithic.
Okay.
The part that I find fascinating in here is that what you're showing is this very high variation between different individuals. Perhaps there's a spatial thing, but it doesn't appear that way given what you've laid out at this point. And in many ways, what we're looking at in some capacity is almost this moment of conspicuous consumption, almost this costly signaling. And that's where I'd love to hear more from you in terms of how are you going to model? How are you going to think about this? If it's not related to social differentiation, how are we going to model this in terms of why we have so much labor being put into the production, and then the display of these, and then the discard of these in some form? So how are you going to wrestle with that?
Very difficult question. And first of all, thank you for your nice comments. Yes, this puzzled us too, but we see these prosperity, if you want, at Baja, and yeah, perhaps they had to signal to others because of the increasing population densities, identities. But the most important thing is for me, what you also mentioned, that they some kind of discard it, but they do not discard it, but they just even destroy very valuable goods intentionally. But by doing this, I think they created again a relationship. So, and they show that in fact the possession of these objects is not the main thing. It's not to have to that you possess it or you accumulate it, but it's rather a circulating of things, giving it and creating relationships by giving, exchanging these objects. I think we have to one step back and get rid of this Western modern idea of possessing something is important. Instead, for them, I think it was important to exchange it, to rework it, to display it, but it's a different approach to objects, I think.
Just as a follow-up then, does that mean that different messages are being created given the variation? You know, it's one thing to say that there are messages created and relationships are created, but then why does somebody have 2,000 beads and somebody else, similar age, has 0 beads?
Yeah, for the moment, I have no idea. I have to tell you frankly. But I do not want to trap in this trap to say it's just social wealth, or I think there can be many reasons, even reasons in the otherworldly sense, which we do not even think about at the moment, you know. So we just have to get in these deep ethic attitudes and try to approach the ideas from a more emic, if this is possible at all, point of view.
Okay, the next question comes from Hojat Darabi. But you have to unmute, Hojat, or write it to chat so that I can read. Meanwhile, may I? Sorry, Hojat, can you hear me?
You hear me?
Oh yes, please.
Okay, just a moment. Okay, thank you, Marion, for your nice presentation. My question is a little bit away from the focus of your presentation, which was about the burial. It's about the site formation. I was wondering about any possible reason behind the formation of the site in such a very, very unusual area. And the second question is concerned with the subsistence strategy of the site. I'm sure you didn't talk about this, but I was very curious about these two. And I think Christoph is online and he can be helpful as well. Thank you.
Perhaps concerning the subsistence, I can answer you. We made new analysis of animal boils, but they confirm for about 100% that the former analysis by Angela van den Driesch. So there is a huge dominance of sheep and goat, above all goats. There's a few gazelles and a few other wild animals, but the amount of domestic sheep and goats is about 70%.
And how about the cultivation? Because there isn't, at least from the side's view picture that I've seen, there is no arable land around the site,
right,
which is inside the canyon. It is a little bit strange.
Right, you're absolutely right. There's only a small part in the eastern area of the plateau, which may have been used for cultivation, but probably they had to go down the stick to get their cereals or other plant foods. The problem at Baja is that the preservation of macro remains is very poor. So it's very difficult to say. Of course, we have some domestic grains, but yeah, we cannot say anything statistically significant. And concerning the site formation, I would again give over to Hans or to Christoph, because they were treating the tectonic issue. So they are the specialists for this.
May I say something to Hojat? Hojat, we did try to reach you and suggest you to make you part of the series for Iranian perspective. If you agree, we will happy to arrange or add one more talk to the series. Could you please contact later with you?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Chris, if you hear me, could you tell us a little bit about the formation? I'm not sure what that, because of some ritual reason that the site was formed inside such a very remote canyon, or was that because of the security reason or something like that? If Chris, you hear me?
Christoph, willst du antworten? Oder?
Okay. Well, Hojat, thank you for your question. Hans, do you want to answer to this question, or should I?
Well,
okay.
The question of Hojat about the site formation, I think the establishment of the site, you mean? Yes, indeed, it's a very secluded setting, but the setting is also a kind of trap. The site is not defendable if people manage to surround the site from the neighboring rocks. So it's always a miracle why they have chosen the setting far away from the open land resources and maybe also from water. When Nigel and Anna first came to the site in the early 2000s, Nigel was very fascinated and thought it's a ritual setting. We don't have evidence for such reasons of site choice or location choice. Rather, I think what this location could have to do with the decline of the LPPNB, the crowdedness of the area, and possibly seeking protections from others. But this is speculation. We don't have, it's the only site I know in the Neolithic of the Near East which has such a secluded setting, which must not be of any advantage. I mentioned it's not defendable. Hojat, we cannot say exactly why they have chosen this, this area. In terms of natural resources in the area, we must imagine that they were involved in a transhumant, in a vertical transhumant system, moving between Wadi al-Araba and the escarpment, the Arabian Plateau, seasonally. So there is no lack of resources theoretically. We don't have found other LPPNB sites in the area. The next one is mega sites of Al-Basit and Pasta. So maybe the area was more crowded in terms, if you look at the inhabitants these sites have. And that there was some competition over land resources in the LPPNB.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is one more question written. Ulf Schub asks, Marion, he asks, what do you make of the reopening of individual graves? Is that a regular feature? And did they remove anything, bones, for example?
This is a very good question. We have two instances where this might have been possible. There's one baby burial, which is in a very large grave pit. And in this grave pit, we found slightly beneath and next to the infant burial, we found an ulna of an adult with bone beads around the ulna, so really in situ, 2 patellas and a right hand. So very strangely, but we suppose that the adult person had been taken off the burial and some bones were left and the infant had been placed in it. But it could also be that these adult bones had been added in the infant burial. So we don't know this really. This is the first instance of removing or possibly removal of bones and reopening the grave. And the other instance is the multiple burial. In the multiple burial, I've shown you with the 2 infants and the isolated baby bones added to them. There is some indications that a large stone slab was removed from this burial. It was laying next to the children burial, but not on top of it anymore. But all the beads seem to be in situ. So we are not very sure about this instance. But for the first issue I told you, yeah, perhaps.
Marin likes to ask something. Please, Marin.
It was very interesting. I was intrigued by the differences that you found among, sorry, there's construction going on behind me, so I apologize. Hopefully you can still hear me. The differences that you found among the infant burial treatments. So differences between ages 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And I wonder if you thought that that had anything to do with life history stages, or if that was something you were going to look into later, like age of weaning, or differences in growth and development and how those individuals were perceived at those different ages in the society.
Yeah, we tried to find out something about ages, of course, if they influence the type of burial or the grave goods, for example. But we can see, for example, the mother of pearl rings. We find them in all stages of children age, from babies. For example, in the collective burial, we have this mother of pearl ring with a baby. At Basta, the same thing. It's in the intramural burial with a baby. And on the other side is Jamila, about 8 to 10 year old, who also had these mother of pearl rings. So this is not a sign of different children ages. I think it's a sign for children, but not of a different age class. What is striking to us are the 3 to 4 year old children. In all cases, they were buried in double burials or in this multiple burial, which is in fact are 2 double burials, because to every individual of 3 to 4 age were associated isolated baby bones. So in fact, these are 2 double burials. And this is strange, but we have too few examples to make a rule out of it. But I don't see any other indications of age classes. And the problem with weaning is that we don't have any isotopes preserved. We have no collagen to determine weaning.
Any other questions?
May I add something?
Sure.
I just want to say something that it's true that the association with status, with social status or wealth is very strongly declining, very fast declining. But we shouldn't throw it out. Like, we have to keep, I think, all the balls in the air, because at a certain point in human history, social differentiation, you know, did happen, and there were rich and poor and different status, and it had to begin sometimes. So I'm not saying that there couldn't be other explanations. Actually, it's very good that there are other explanations, but we cannot turn around and be as zealous as the people who claim that everything to do with grave goods indicates wealth or status, and turn around and be as zealous about not considering it, because we have to keep in mind that maybe there is an element of wealth there, because, you know, if we're throwing out speculations, I can say that one of the reasons that there are so many decorations with children is because they had very powerful parents that could support it. While, you know, when they're growing up and they're dead, it's like, you know, the difference between a living dog and a dead lion, in the sense that nobody will take care of you when you're dead, and maybe then equality rules. But when children die, and they're still children of rich people, it's a wild speculation. I'm not sure even if I myself will believe it in 10 minutes time from now, but I just want to point out that we should remember that it's very complex, and you can't take out wealth or social status out of the equation. We should keep this also as one of the options.
Yeah, and if I may answer, or not answer, but contribute to this. Yes, you're absolutely right. And what we've written in the 2019 article about OSAID, it's definitely that there is social differentiation, but what we see, it's rather the primi inter pares, which means that power was preserved for a certain time in certain situations, but we do not see, at the moment at least for Baja, maybe at Baja it's something different. At Baja, we do not see this institutionalized social status differentiation.
Yeah.
So, but you're absolutely right. Another thing is, what struck me all the time was that it seems that there are 2 different types of burial categories. On the one hand, we have these ornaments, and it seems that especially children are often decorated with a lot of beads. This holds true for Halula, I think, too, Ian, if I'm right. This is the same thing at Çatalhöyük, where now Milena Vasic has published her PhD about the beads. And for the adults, they receive other grave goods, but they do not have the same amounts of beads. But perhaps this is a wrong impression. Maybe others can contribute other evidences.
Thanks, Marion. It's great actually to have you and talk to you like that. That's yes. the only advantage of the bloody COVID.
Marion, isn't it also the case at Körtiktepe that the children and infant burials get a special treatment?
Yeah, many at Körtiktepe, many burials are richly decorated infant burials, but there are also some adult burials which have a lot of beads. Really, Körtik is still, I'd say, on the top again with Bonşuklu, Tala now. In the Mardin area, and of course Çatalhöyük has a lot of rich beads, but also most richly buried individuals are children, if I remember well. Maybe Milena is here. Milena, are you here? No, doesn't seem so. But perhaps Ian can say something about Halula or Hala. Hala, she's worked on the Halula beads too.
Hala would be a better person to speak to it in terms of the detail.
Hala, go ahead, your turn.
Okay, so can you please repeat the question? You wanted to know whether children were more ornamented than adults?
Than adults, yes.
In Halula, yes, it is the case.
Okay.
Absolutely. And also we can make differentiation between the types of bead within the category of children, the very large category of children, because I'm not able now to distinguish subcategories because I don't really recall very well. And between adults also, we can distinguish at least 2 or 3 types of ornaments, but they are much less ornamented than children.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Avi Gofer likes to ask, please.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. It was beautiful to see. I want to continue the idea that Anna was presenting before and ask you whether you can consider this very high outcirculating of wealth into a grave, which means it's out of circulation. It's not seen. It's not useful. Can you think about it as some kind of a competitive feasting? Some kind of not a feasting of food, but a feast. There's a funeral. Something is going on there. There is a gathering of people, and there is an immense outcirculation of wealth. Can you consider it competitive? And this is why it's differential?
Maybe, yeah. But if it were competitive, shouldn't we find it in more burials?
I don't know. That depends.
We don't know how many.
That depends on the competition.
How many rich people there were.
It depends on the competition. It's a small community. Yeah. I'm not talking about a singular person who is richer or stronger, etc., etc. As an idea, if there is a competition of any sort, so you can feed people, you can break wealth. Fragment good pieces on site when it happens, when the thing is happening, when the celebration, when the burial, whatever it is, or you can outcirculate it, because outcirculating 2,000 beads is not something that is unnoticed by people.
No, of course not. Yeah. It will have been noticed and it will have created very strong memories. I hope I made this clear. And
yeah.
But I still think it's, in fact, I was always struggling with the word excommodification, because in fact it's a decommodification. They decommodify these huge amount of beads into social capital, if you want.
Yes.
I don't like this word, social capital, but in fact it is social capital, and they enhanced and enforced the social affiliations by giving these things away. I think this is my idea. And whether it was competitive or not, yeah, maybe it's a good idea to think about it, yes.
I'm raising it because it's not exchange.
No.
It's not that you're exchanging it for something or with somebody.
Yeah.
You are just, you call it decommoditization, I call it out circulation. It doesn't matter how you call it, but you're doing, it's a very basic act. And I agree that it has to do with memories later on, but yeah, it's very basic that you take a whole lot of wealth and just cover it by a big stone.
Yeah, and what would support your idea of competitiveness are these striking differences in the combination of beads. You know, we don't have a second Jamila, but we have another burial with a huge amount of cauries, which are not used in the burial of Jamila. So maybe this is an indication that your direction to think of is a good idea. Yeah, thank you.
Well,
you must like to ask, please.
I don't want to ask a question, but I want to give a brief information for the subadult burials. The increased number of subadult burials during the PPNB and pottery Neolithic. And in Anatolia in general, and we saw that after the mid-PPNB, the subadult individuals increased in the population. And many of the buildings contain the infants and young adult and subadult, but the adult, especially for males, do not represent in the subfloor burials. And that's why we have to think about the development of multiple burials or graveyard or extramural graveyard. For example, at Aşıklı, the Mihriban and the others excavated a very large area, and the number of individuals do not reach to 100. And the 40% of these individuals belong to infants and subadults. And among the adults, and 2/3 of them belong to female. And it is also supported by the DNA analysis. And we know that the increased subadults together with increased female is contemporary to each other. And for late Neolithic, many of the settlements do not represent the adult individual. And many of them just contain the subadult. And this means that there is a trend to the increase of subadults and increase of the collective burials, and maybe increase or maybe development of the graves or graveyards. And that's why we have to think about that, the differentiation based on the age and sex in after the mid of the PPNB. I just want to add some brief information with using the Anatolian skeletal sample.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. And yes, perhaps at Baja, maybe we don't really see this triage between males and females. We have, at least in the adults we have in these collective burials, we have males and females. Yeah. So, but we have only a very few amount of adult burials.
Yeah, I know. Many of the late Neolithic, the settlement in Anatolia do not contain enough adult individual, and this is not easy to explain mortality and others. And we have to think about the age and sex-based differentiation in the population with the change in the ideology in during the Neolithic Neolithization process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yilmaz.
Trevor, your hand was raised 2 minutes ago.
I was just thinking back to what Marion was showing us, and thinking about competition or conspicuous consumption. But Marion, you told us, you showed us that these burials took place in the basements of complicated buildings. Not many people would see the burial, other than those taking part in making the burial. So if there is to be some element of conspicuous consumption, then you have to start saying, well, before the body is taken there has to be some ceremonies out in the settlement where people have the opportunity to observe what the group of people who are conducting the burial are doing. But in the basements of these houses, there would only be a very small number of people, and they would be directly involved in making the burial, presumably.
Right. This is a good argument, Trevor. I was not thinking about this, but you're absolutely right. Unless we reconstruct a ceremony and the preparing of the corpses outside the space.
Yeah, and I think that illustrates the point that we only see what survives in the archaeology, and they made the burial, so we see the burial, but we don't see what else they did in the way of all sorts of activities and ceremonies and things. Yeah. Simply because they have left no archaeological trace, or they've not yet been identified with archaeological traces. Right. So there's we're very concentrated on these burials as burials, but we don't know how they fit into the word you used before, the life way of the settlement, of the community. Right. Yeah. Mute.
Yeah, that's a very nice point. Any other questions? I think there is no more. Let me see. Anna had written something.
No, it's not a question.
It's not.
I'm just responding to what Hans-Georg said, but I just want to say something about being very cautious. Like we really don't know anything. I remember Ofer Bar Yosef used to say that when he sees a grave, his natural reaction is to run away from it while digging, because he can cope with architecture, he can cope with a lot of things, but starting these speculations about what the grave or the burials mean is really a huge task. And I think he's right, because for everything we say, somebody can say the other way around. Like, for example, Moritz was saying that it's something to be given to the children for their afterlife, or it's just the beginning, not the end. And then, of course, somebody can, so just, to present a different idea, which accords with what Avi was saying, and we are sitting in different places. He's in Tel Aviv or near Tel Aviv, and I'm in Jerusalem, is that I'm sure all of you know about the cargo cult, for example, when people accumulate wealth, and then for whatever complex social reasons, they simply burn everything. They destroy everything, and they make a big feast. It's happening. I think now it's stopped, of course, but it's ethnographically known from New Guinea. And they get rid of the wealth and they start everything anew. So that's my main point, is that we should keep all the balls in the air and try to figure out which one fits specifically, maybe if we are lucky, to this particular or that particular circumstances, and not just, exchange one domineering opinion by another domineering opinion.
Yeah. I think this is the strength of this series, that we see so many possibilities, and in every area, it might have been different. Even if we look at Baja and Basta, we had these discussions 2 days ago, no, one day, yesterday, in fact, with Christoph and Hans, and Hans explained it perfectly well, that there's a huge difference between Basta and Baja, although they are very close to each other and they are contemporary, more or less.
Yeah. We also like to show you in April how 2 different communities, contemporary communities living in Central Anatolia are so different from each other.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Nice.
In April.
I think Daniela has
Daniela, sorry, Daniela. Yes, please.
One other little comment, and to continue what Anna said, I can tell you something else that the Ofer Bar Yosef used to say, and that is that in New Guinea, you can find anything you want.
Yeah, exactly.
And along those lines, there is a well-known ethnographic example of Malinovsky's, not necessarily New Guinea, but probably the Trobriand Islands, where there was a big discussion when they buried a young person on whether or not, that after they had buried a person with the necklace he was wearing in his lifetime, there was a big discussion on whether to retrieve the necklace because they wanted it back, because they didn't want to bury it. So when you bury artifacts, whatever they are, especially personal ornaments, but not only, you usually do it only when you can afford to do it. If it's really, really very precious, it's not only about showing the prestige of that person who's buried or the feelings of the parents to the child, but it's the possibility to bury something that's worthwhile. If you have a lot of it, then you can afford to do it. If you do not, if your livelihood depends on these beads for exchanging with other communities for food, for example, then you will